Good morning. It's March 22nd, 2020. My name is Vincent Walker. I'm the superintendent of Emanuel AME Church Sunday School in Mobile, Alabama. We're adjusting things a little bit on today and probably for the near future in lieu of what's going on in our world, our country, our state, our county, and down to our city. We're going to be changing things up a little bit. We ask you to bear with us. First off, I want to say that to the believers of God, God's people, my brothers and sisters, this should not be a shock to us. If you read God's Word daily, or if you've studied it extensively, you know that things of this sort and this proportion has happened before. Should not be a surprise to us, especially many times in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament. When things of this sort happened, God's people knew the one thing they had to do was lean and depend on Him. It said countless times in His Word. So today's Sunday school lesson, it's an adjustment. But today we're going to talk about corrupt leaders. It continues in this quarter. This is our Sunday school book that we use in the AME church. So this is our fourth lesson. Just to give you a little backstory, our first topic was call to accountability. It was found in Amos chapter 5. And that lesson spoke to how the rich as well as the middle class were treating the poor. And they continued with their fancy religious and ritual things. But that was something God was not pleased with. So we have to remember to treat all people with respect, love, and kindness. We continue to get into justice and talk about justice in lesson 2 when Habakkuk petitioned God in a prayer for justice. That's what our title in lesson 2 was. Habakkuk prayed to God because he saw the injustices that were going on with the religious leaders of that time. Although God's answer was not what Habakkuk wanted. God's reply to Habakkuk was that he was going to send the Babylonians to rule over them, and God's people would fall under Babylonian captivity. And that surprised Habakkuk. He even went as far to call them heathens. Said, God, we're better than them. Why would you subject us to this cruelty? But we see in the next lesson, in lesson 3, that God had a plan. Lesson 3 talks about the consequences of injustices. So in this lesson, God reminded Habakkuk that there would be justice for how the Babylonians were treated and would treat their people, his people. The point of that lesson is God was using the Babylonians to humble his people. That's one point that I want you to take out of that. We needed to be humbled. I say we because I believe I'm one of God's chosen people. I know that. So those are my ancestors, and I believe that. So today we get to lesson 4, and we're talking about corrupt leaders. We continue to talk about justice. So in this, we jump to the prophet Micah. And Micah is speaking to the people because the religious leaders, they're just out of control. They have began to basically rain down their own justice. In lack of a better words, money was talking in that time. If you were rich, you can kind of get what you wanted. That is similar to today in society, where the rich prosper. But we know that God is not happy with those things. So today we're talking about corrupt leaders, and we're talking about Micah, one of God's cherished prophets. So Micah was deeply in love with his country, and when these things began to happen, and they were happening, it disappointed Micah. Micah began to see how the rich people and also the high-powered religious leaders were raining down justice on people. They were building up the country on the backs of the poor, and Micah did not see that to be right, and he knew that that was not right in God's eyes. So as we go along in our day and we continue to live out our life, we have to realize that we, even though that we may get in power or we may have a power position, we're still held accountable by God. So in today's lesson, we're looking at Micah chapter 3 through 6. However, our focus scriptures are in Micah chapter 3 verses 1 through 2, verses 9 through 12, and then we jump to chapter 6 and we go through verses 6 through 8. And it reads, and I'll be reading from the NRSV translation of the Bible. And I said, listen, you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel. Should you not know justice? You who hate the good and love the evil, who tear the skin off my people and the flesh off their bones, who eat the flesh of my people, flay their skin of them, break their bones in pieces, and chop them up like meat in a kettle, like flesh in a cauldron. Verse 9 through 12 says, hear this, you rulers of the house of Jacob, and chiefs of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all iniquity, who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with wrong. Its rulers give justice for a bribe. Its priests teach for a price. Its prophets give oracles for money. Yet they lean upon the Lord and say, surely the Lord is with us. No harm shall come upon us. Therefore because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field. Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the house of the wooded height. Then we jump to chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. This declaration says, with what I shall come before the Lord and bow myself, God on high. Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of the body of the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and love kindness and to walk humbly with the Lord. Verse 8 is very important in this. As a matter of fact, it is the key verse today. The second part of verse 8, it says, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. I think we as God's people in this time and even currently today, we've lost our humility. We've left justice up to ourselves. We've left justice up to the courts. We've left justice up to people. But we know that ultimate justice lies in God. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have to obey the laws of the land, because the laws are put there to protect people. And especially if those laws align with God's word. So Micah, he goes down and he's talking to the people of Judah. And Micah is grieving for his people because he sees that the poor are being treated unfairly. And these people are using their powers, their religious powers, to prosper. Even the prophets, even the leaders are using their powers. The prophets are being paid to false prophesize. The religious leaders are using their high powers, using God's word and twisting it to treat people wrong and build countries on the backs of other people. Michael's biggest concern, it says, was the social ills of the day. And we still see social ills today. So that's why I said, in lieu of what's going on today, we shouldn't be surprised, because even the viruses that are going on, all the plagues, all the sickness that's going on, social ills still exist today. And I've seen quite a few printings and posts of Second Chronicles, when it speaks of when the fires come and God does not send the rain, I'm paraphrasing, and when the locusts come and when God sends the plagues, we have instructions on what to do. It says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, turn from their wicked ways, and seek my face, it says, then God will hear in heaven and he will heal the land. These people at this time were wicked. They were practicing wicked things. And we have people today who are practicing wicked things, who are building countries, who are building communities, who are building different things off the backs of poor people just because they have the money and they have the power to do so. My people, God is not pleased with that. He is not. We have to turn from our wicked ways. And not only will God heal us physically, God will heal us spiritually. Michael goes on to say, and he speaks about how the religious leaders and the addressing that he's done. Michael wanted us to know that God wanted obedience. Obedience, people. I'm not saying you don't need to go to church, you don't need to worship, you don't need to pray, you don't need to sing. But if you are doing all of that and your soul is corrupt, that worship is not leaving the roof of the church. That worship is not leaving the roof of your house. Obedience, treating people with love, kindness, and respect. Humble yourself. In James chapter 5, verse 16, we often hear the part that says, the effective, fervent prayer of the righteous man availeth much. But before that, the first part of that verse says, confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The self-righteousness is at an all-time high in our world and in our faith today. We believe that we can do no wrong. We believe that the wrong that we do is our business, that it doesn't affect other people, but we're all God's children. We're all God's chosen people. So that means we're his children. Your friend is your brother. That's your sister. Family helps each other. What was going on in this time, Michael's people, they weren't helping each other. They saw each other in a different class and they saw themselves as different. But God is our Father that makes all of us brothers and sisters, and he loves all of us dearly. Now, one thing that my older brothers would get in trouble for quicker than anything growing up is the mistreatment of me, because I was the younger brother. So God holds those who know better to a higher standard. We as his chosen people, we as the body of believers, we as Christians, we know better. So let us do better in this time. I say to you, my brothers and my sisters, through this time that we're going through, this time of adjustment, humble yourselves, adhere to the warnings, be cautious, take care of yourself. Remember that our most powerful weapon against anything, any wars of this world, is prayer. Prayer is our most powerful weapon. Continue to pray, my brothers and sisters. I love you. Stay faithful. Believe in God. Trust him. I love you.